Hi, and welcome to the video portion of the lecture series on logic and critical reasoning. So today I want to talk about the logical fallacies and give a little bit of explanation and analysis to go along with them. So logical fallacies, what they are basically is they are mistakes that we want to avoid. They're common mistakes, and so they've made it to this level where we have quantified them into fallacies. So it's a bit like an urban legend where people largely believe that they're true, but they're known to be false. That sort of thing. That's what these are. They're known falsehoods, but they sound like decent ways to reason, and so we're often confused by them. You may recognize some of these logical fallacies, and you may have used them yourself. You may have used them recently, and that's okay. We all do and have, but the idea is that you should try to become aware of them and try to be able to identify this flawed reasoning in the arguments and the communication that you encounter. This way you will be able to filter out the bad stuff and keep the good stuff. All right, so let's take a look at these. First of all, we have the ad hominem. Now, this is Latin. It literally means to the man. An ad hominem fallacy occurs when you make a personal attack towards someone. So, for example, if I said, no one should listen to this president. I mean, look at the wild, crazy hair and the way that he boasts and brags and shoots his mouth off. No one should listen to a big mouth like that. It's just obvious on the surface that he is someone that you cannot take seriously. All right. Those things may have elements of truth to them, but the point of it being a fallacy is that the bad personality traits do not indicate that a person's opinions are wrong. So just because we can run them into the ground because of how they behave or what they look like, and you can win points with the audience doing that, technically it does nothing to discredit their points. We need to address their arguments and their points in order to discredit them as people. That's the way to do that. So that's the ad hominem. Number two is question begging. Now, question begging, it's just like it sounds. You're actually not answering the question. When you give the answer, you're merely begging the same question, but it sounds like an answer. So, for example, marijuana is obviously a dangerous substance, and we can know this because it's against the law in most states and most places. And a substance wouldn't be made against the law unless there were a reason to, unless it were dangerous or had some negative properties to it. So that's how we can know that that is a dangerous substance. Now, why is that flawed reasoning? Because the fact that it's a law doesn't actually tell me anything. We've had laws, we had prohibition and then we turned it back over. We've had all kinds of stupid laws in the past that we've gotten rid of. The fact that something is a law now or ever was doesn't speak any truth to whether or not it's fact or fiction. So that is question begging. Sounds like you gave a good answer, but you really didn't. You just asked the same question, perhaps in a slightly different way. The red herring is a distraction. This is my favorite one. And it's because the red herring, I'll give you the background on this. The red herring is a fish. And somehow the red herring had this notorious reputation as the smelliest fish on the beach. And they all stink when they wash up on shore, but somehow the red herring, I've never personally encountered one, but this is what they say. They are just overwhelming. Your eyes would water if you encountered one. They're that bad. And so the red herring logical fallacy is a distraction. That's why it's called the red herring. The idea being that the overwhelming smell of the red herring would distract you from anything else. And so that's how the argument gets its name. But I guess if you were escaping from prison, maybe, and you were running through the woods and the dogs were behind you, and instead of running through the river to lose your scent like they did in the old movies, if you just had a red herring in your back pocket, you could toss it out on the trail, and then the dogs would be so overwhelmed by the scent when they got, I don't know why you'd have it would be a terrible item to serve for prison lunch, wouldn't it? Red herring. Anyway, the dogs would be overwhelmed by the scent, and then you could make your escape. That's the idea. So the red herring. If we had a debate, let's say there were two people debating, and I said to my opponent, tell me whether or not you believe it is moral to be unfaithful to your spouse. And my opponent says, Okay, well, you've asked me a question about morality. So, to begin with, who is the arbiter of morality? Is it me? Is it you? Who is? Philosophers have argued about this for centuries, and now I am posed with a question based on what morality is. So, who among us could be the expert of what is moral and what is not? It is a subjective term. All right, so you can see what I'm doing. I've run you way out on a limb and said, hey, everyone, look, follow me out here. Pay no attention to that question that was asked before. And so now that I've got you out there, you're just sort of lost and dazzled with my ability to speak about nothing, that you become distracted and feel like, oh, I gave a pretty good response there when I really didn't do anything. Just a red herring. Now, the next one has a funny name, reductio ad absurdum, but this one is probably the easiest. It's probably the one that you will all recognize. And you want to go to the party on Friday night because everyone else at school is going, and their parents let them go. And the response that you get is, well, if everyone's parents were letting them go jump off a bridge, would you go do that too? And so that is the reductio ad absurdum. Basically, it just means reduction to the absurd. And so what I'm doing is I'm taking your statement or your proposition, your question in this case, and I am rephrasing it in a totally absurd way in order to dismiss it. Well, what's the problem with that? The problem is that it's not quite the same thing to say that if people's parents were encouraging them to jump off a bridge, then I would want to do that too. I want to do this because it's an activity that all kids do. And I'm merely pointing out that the other parents have allowed it. It has nothing to do with jumping off bridges. Unless your parents tell you that, then it's accurate. All right. The next two on here I'll do jointly: appeal to popularity and appeal to tradition. So this is a mistake that occurs, appeal to popularity, when I say something like, well, of course UFOs exist. I mean, there have been thousands and thousands of sightings for decades, and that many people seeing that many things and knowing that there are so many people in the public who now believe in UFOs, there must be something to it. Okay, that's a appeal to popularity, and it's not true because, as we know, there have been times in the world when people in large numbers have believed all kinds of stupid things. That the world was flat, that we should do this, we should do that, we should think this way. This is a good way to govern. That's a good way to govern. Yeah, there are mistakes all the time. So something being a popular opinion is not an indication of truth. Appeal to tradition is the same way. I might make an argument to you that we shouldn't have any restrictions on purchasing guns. You shouldn't have to show an ID or fill out a form or do a background check or anything. I should be able to walk in a store and just slap my money on the table and walk out with any gun that's on the back wall, because that's the way it was when we started this country. In the Wild West, when the country was settled and we made the expansion, that's how things were. And we've gotten away from that. We need to get back to the things that made our country great in the beginning. All right. What a horrible argument that is, right? No, we probably should still take a look at people to make sure they're not criminally insane before we allow them to purchase weapons. The idea that we've always done it this way is not a good argument to continue doing it this way. Therefore, the appeal to tradition, in this case, no good. The false dilemma, maybe the easiest one of all of them. I'll give this one to you very simply. The car salesmen love to use it because you go down and you look at the car and you say, well, thanks for your time. I'm going to think it over and I'll let you know. Thank you. And you try to leave, and what do? They chase you down and they give you every argument, every reason why you should buy the car right now. And ultimately, they'll try to put you in a corner and say something like this. You woke up today and you decided you were going to buy a new car. That's why you drove down to the dealership. That's why you spent time with me. And that's why we test drove it. I had the car that you wanted, priced even less than you wanted. You drove it. You fell in love with it. It's got everything you want. What is there to think about? You either buy the new car and you get what you came down here for, or what? You don't have a car? Are you going to take the bus to work? Do you want to hitchhike to work? Are you going to carpool with your buddies? You want to get into that routine? I mean, here we are. We're at the crossroads. I have the product you want. Are you going to make the decision? That's a false dilemma, because The choices aren't buy my new car or do something that you don't want to do, like hitchhike or carpool or something like this. No, I could do any number of different things. I could buy a new car at a different dealership. I could keep the car that I have. I could buy a motorcycle. I could take the bus. The salesman wants me to feel like there are only two choices, and he's going to show me how terrible one of them is, and then I will think by default I should just defer to the other option, which is buy the car. Yeah, not a good argument. You could think of it like this. Either 2 plus 2 equals 7 or 2 plus 2 equals 19. Well, we all know 2 plus 2 doesn't equal 19, so therefore, obviously, 2 plus 2 is 7. False dilemma. Both of those statements were incorrect. Last but not least, the slippery slope. And this is my all-time favorite argument to dislike. It's the one that keeps me awake at night. And the reason is that it's a logical fallacy, but the talking heads on the news shows, on television and other areas, they will use it. They will even say the name of the fallacy as they try to pass it off as a legitimate argument. And it just drives me crazy. The slippery slope is an invalid argument. It's not a good argument. So when you hear someone say, well, that sounds all well and nice, but if we do that, we're just going down the slippery slope because then that will cause this and this will go. And then everybody around them just sort of, they nod their head in bovine agreement as though it was correct. It's not correct. I'm the guy at home like throwing shoes at the television. So please don't use the slippery slope argument. It basically is the like the domino theory argument. It goes like this. If you do this, that will cause this, which will cause this, which will cause this. And so if you initiate that first action, we'll be stuck in a series of consequences that will lead us to this terrible place. So we heard arguments like this in the public sphere before. If you legalize marijuana, next people will want to legalize cocaine, and then they'll want to legalize methamphetamine, and then heroin, and then pretty soon we'll just legalize all prescription drugs, and we'll have people laying in the street drooling. We don't want people laying in the street drooling, so we can't legalize marijuana. It's a slippery slope argument. Please don't use that. If I'm watching television at some point in the future and you happen to go on to a successful career and you're being interviewed and I hear you use the slippery slope argument, I will find you. I mean it. No, I probably won't, but I won't like it. I'll go back and change your grade. How about that? All right, that's a little bit about the logical fallacies. I just wanted to give you some explanation and unpack that for you so that you know how not to use them and you know how to identify them. It's one thing to read them on paper, but until you hear them in a practical application, it's probably not something you'd pay a lot of attention to. So I hope this helped you to make sense of the logical fallacies. I appreciate your time. Take care.